Actually, that was it for the lab. I was going to split that in two, but we did it all at one time. But I wanted to show you one thing here on the board and talk about troubleshooting a little bit here with HSRP as well. You can statically set that MAC address as I show you here with the standby 5 MAC address command. One thing I do want you to note is that the MAC address does take a few seconds to change, and the HSRP routers are going to go into learn state for that time period. So again, not something you necessarily want to do in the middle of a production day, but the actual HSRP config should only go down for a few seconds or go to learn state, and then you're right back where you were with active and the MAC address changes. One other thing here I want to mention with these state changes too, just like with OSPF, we don't want to see a lot of SPF recalculations in OSPF, I should say, because that means we may have an unstable part of the network somewhere, links flapping, something like that, because SPF should not continually be recalculating. Well, HSRP shouldn't be changing states a lot either. If you're troubleshooting and you're wondering if there is a problem in there, and you keep running show standby and notice the state changes accumulating over a period of time, that's telling you that you definitely have a problem. One thing that can cause that, and granted this is self-inflicted, but self-inflicted wounds happen. If you're messing around with the hello time and the hold time, if you set the hold time low on one router in your standby group, and you set the hello times high, you can see what's going to happen there, right? You're going to continually drop between your routers. You're going to continually drop the communication. Then it's going to come back up and then they get a hello. So really, unless you have an overriding reason to change your hello and hold times in HSRP, don't cause yourself trouble. Just leave them alone. You also want to check your cables, of course, with HSRP or with anything else, but I have seen that in a lab. And you have to watch that if you're working in a physical lab. And certainly nothing wrong with GNS3 or Packet Tracer or whatever you've got, use it. But it's easy as you continually move cables around in a lab environment to just nudge one a little too loose. And it's always a good idea to tighten your cables first, HSRP or anything else when it comes to troubleshooting. Now, one thing we saw definitely in that last lab was a bit of a drawback with HSRP. Because what happens with it, what happens with it is that, we get to choose our active router if we don't like the way the election worked out. But the problem is the active router is still doing all the work and the standbys are just hanging around not doing anything. We don't necessarily want that. HSRP is not really built for load balancing. We can configure it. It's called multi-group HSRP. I'm going to show you that concept here on the board in just a moment. It's actually referred to MHSRP. You'll see that acronym once in a while. That's multi-group HSRP, and it's usually referred to by the informal name HSRP load balancing. And on the next screen is a network that would lend itself very nicely to load balancing. And it's amazingly similar to what we have, right? We had a router 2 and a router 3. We had 2 routers, but by default, the active router is going to handle all the traffic and the standby is going to stand by. Well, what you could do here is create multiple HSRP groups. And what I've done with the config I'm going to show you in a moment is router 2, I've made it the standby for group 11, but the active router for group 22. Then router 3, I've made the active for group 11 and the standby for group 22. And it's a little tricky, you just have to watch your configs, but you can see what I've done here. It's not a long config at all. And again, I've joined the routers to 2 groups, put preempt on each of the standby statements, and then changed the priority to 99 for the group that I wanted them to be the standby for. So in this particular config, for group 11, router 3 would become the active because its default priority is 100, and I set router 2's priority for group 11 to 99. So that's exactly what we wanted. Router 3 would become the active for 11. Then for group 22, router 2 would become the active router because, again, you put preempt on all your statements here, and I actively set router 3's priority for group 22 to 99. So it's going to be one less, of course, than router 2's. Router 2 will become the active for group 22. Now, if you're thinking, okay, that's all fine and swell, but that seems a little bit convoluted, I'm not going to lie to you, you're right. And while you could also base your load balancing on VLAN memberships and subnets, there are a couple of different approaches you could use here. But the key is you are bringing that second router into the picture. You're letting it handle some of the load. Now, this isn't 50-50 load balancing by any means, and if the host using .11 as their gateway are sending 80% of your traffic and the host using .22 as their default gateway are sending the other 20%, well then, one router is working 4 times as hard as the other. But it's still better than having one router doing all the work and the other one just standing by. But this also shows you not only how you could do some load balancing with HSRP, but that HSRP really wasn't built for load balancing. And yes, there is a reason that I've said that twice in the last couple of minutes. Now, a little troubleshooting. Show standby really is just your command for HSRP. And while I'm showing you this from the board, I went in and really just deliberately misconfigured HSRP quite badly on a router so I could show you a couple things to watch out for. In router 1 here, you'll note bolded is standby router is unknown. And here, with group 5 on the same router, state is init, virtual IP, and wrong subnet. I mean, the router will actually tell you that. And then it's saying, hey, this active virtual MAC address is unknown. Active router is unknown. Standby router is unknown. So obviously, we have a real mess here. That's not good. We've got all kinds of problems. Well, naturally, the active and standby router is going to be unknown if in the group 5 readout we're being told the subnet is incorrect. And that, of course, tells us what we need to correct right there. Well, in the group 1 readout, the active router is local, but the standby is unknown. And again, that could be a misconfig on our part as well. But along with checking the config, just remember to check your cables at the same time, because loose cables can cause all kinds of trouble. And it may even still be showing up as connected. Your cables are going to look like they're connected with your show commands, but then when you tighten them, it's like, oh, look, the line protocol came up or such and such came up. Most HSRP issues, and I know I ran a lot by you there, so we'll swim through here again, but when you start seeing stuff like standby router is unknown, virtual IP and wrong subnet, virtual IP, wrong subnet for this interface, you just need to go back and check that config again. Group number could be one number off, but there it's obviously an IP addressing problem. That's when you're glad that you're good with subnetting, because you can go in and just, it's easy sometimes to look at IP addresses and say, okay, these are on the same subnet. That's easy when your mask ends in 8, 16, or 24. When it ends in 21 or 27, that's when you want to be able to break down your ones and your zeros and make sure that the IP addresses that you think are on the same subnet actually are on the same subnet. To be frank with you here, may I be frank? Most HSRP issues you run into fall into 2 simple categories. Either the secondary router didn't become the active router when it should have, and I mean the standby router, or the former active router didn't take back over when it came back online. Because that situation could occur. Earlier, when router 3 was the active and we didn't have the preempt statements on any of the standby commands, maybe we wanted router 3 to be the active router. But if it went down, router 2 takes over while router 3 is gone. And then unless we've got preempt on router 3, when it comes back up, it's not going to take back over. Is the preempt command properly configured? And believe me, I put this first in the list for a reason. That is the problem so often. And then just check your priorities. What are the priority values of each HSRP speaker? That's a lot of detail that we've gone into there, and it's only one of our redundancy choices. And we're going to check out another one in the next video, the Virtual Router Redundancy Protocol. And what you're going to find out is that in a way, you've already been studying this one. We'll talk about that when we come back and then look at another one, load balancing procedure or redundancy procedure after VRRP, but we'll talk about that next.